Welcome to Shaq's house. Shaq's house. That's our Shaq. You're now in Shaq's house. Shaq's house. Shaq. Welcome to Shaq's house.
What's going on, Shaq Houses? How you doing? It's your boy, the one and only Shaq House here. Hope your past 2 weeks have been going well. Happy Black History Month too, by the way. And check this out. Even though we're going to get into black characters for this month, right now I promise you something X-Men related. This right here, it represents one of my favorite X-Men storylines ever. It's Endgame. No, not Avengers Endgame. No. Get your mind off that. No. I'm talking about X Factor Endgame. You have 4-part storyline that pretty much paved the way for the original X Factor to return back to their roots, namely the X-Men. It's also where, Nathan Summers, it's the start of where he becomes Cable. Yeah, this was great in retrospect, and it was Chris Claremont, his way of taking back Cyclops. Yeah, Taking Back Sunday, then there's Taking Back Cyclops. Don't know what I mean? Check it out. Haha. Okay, here's a bit of a prologue. The original X Factor's skyscraping headquarters was originally an exploratory celestial craft that was sent to Earth as a recorder during the 12th century. A young Sabah found it, merged with the vessel's technology, and became Apocalypse, while the craft's programming evolved into a sentient artificial intelligence calling itself Ship. Apocalypse used Ship to battle his arch-nemesis, X Factor, who later claimed it as their headquarters. Ship became friendly with its residents, aiding them and allowing only mutants to enter it. The birth of Nathan Christopher Charles Summers, the infant son of Cyclops and his wife Madelyne Pryor, was orchestrated through events by Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister. Sinister wanted to create a powerful mutant that he could use to kill a master that he could no longer abide by, Apocalypse. Knowing this, the Egyptian decided to kill 3 birds at once. X Factor, since they're his top foes, Ship, for what he sees as a betrayal, and the young Nathan Summers, who's a dire threat to him. Endgame took place in X Factor issues 65 through 68 through the months of April through July of 1991. And here's the meat of the story. Part 1. Ship is malfunctioning, and Apocalypse plans to avenge himself on X Factor and Ship, which had been his until the Fall of the Mutant storyline in X Factor number 25. But no longer having his 4 horsemen, he observes X Factor with his latest group of henchmen, the Riders of the Storm. Meanwhile, Archangel renews his relationship with NYPD officer Charlotte Jones, Jean Grey has a heart-to-heart conversation with Cyclops, Iceman goes to a record store to visit his girlfriend Opal for lunch, and Hank McCoy watches his own girlfriend Trish Tilby report the news on TV. Next, the Riders crash their vehicle into Ship, board, and attack. Synapse, he attacks Jean Grey on the astral plane, and that triggers the resurgence of her telepathy. And she quickly uses it to defeat Synapse and Gauntlet, and the other Riders of the Storm have already been subdued. However, another rider, Hard Drive, is infiltrating Ship's cybernetic core, infecting it with a virus to shut it down. Part 2. Ship is now infected with the computer virus, and his physical structure goes out of control. Attacking New York City with superheroes from all over the city kept busy rescuing people from it. Hard Drive, he knocks out Jean Grey while continuing to corrupt Ship's systems. But Ship nevertheless manages to warn Cyclops that his son, Nathan Christopher, is in danger. Meanwhile, a mysterious woman calling herself Askani arrives suddenly and mistakenly attacks X Factor, thus allowing the Rider of the Storm known as Foxbat to teleport away with the baby. The police, they storm Ship, but it only allows Charlotte Jones to enter. Gauntlet tries to abduct her but is foiled by Archangel. Hank is able to establish a mental communication link with Ship, which announces that it is dying, but is unwilling to be controlled by Apocalypse again. So it rockets into space and plans to self-destruct with X Factor and Charlotte Jones inside there. And Apocalypse, he prudently teleports his people away. Cyclops berates Ship, telling him to find another way and that suicide is not the answer. Beast tries valiantly to rewrite Ship's programming to ensure their survival, but Ship explodes in space anyway. Askani looks on and vows to find and protect Nathan by any means necessary. Part 3. Ship explodes in space. However, in the final nanoseconds before the explosion, he and Beast managed to download the core elements of ship's AI into a luminescent electromagnetic energy survival module that protected X-Factor and Charlotte Jones. The Inhumans arrive in a larger ship and bring the module aboard. You see, their home, the Great Refuge on the Moon, was overrun by Apocalypse and the Riders of the Storm, so they ally with X-Factor to take back their home and stop Apocalypse once and for all. It's revealed that the Riders of the Storm are actually Inhumans, and both Foxbat and Gauntlet are members of the Inhuman royal family. The two of them teleport aboard the Inhuman ship just long enough to abduct Crystal, who happens to be their cousin. It's revealed that Askani is actually from the future, and she's trying to change her past in order to save her present. Meanwhile, Apocalypse and his scientists are attempting to kill Nathan Summers by siphoning his life energy into Apocalypse's, but the baby is resisting. X-Factor and the Inhumans, they attack Apocalypse's stronghold on the moon, and they use SHIP to project holograms of themselves, drawing their foes' attention and then attacking from the rear. The Inhumans remain to free their enslaved citizens, while X-Factor, they go after Apocalypse himself. On their way to him, they realize that they're in the same place on the moon where the Phoenix died during the Dark Phoenix saga. Cyclops, he blasts right through a door, revealing Apocalypse. He then unleashes another powerful optic blast, but discovers that it's only a hologram of his enemy. The real Apocalypse is revealed, enormous sized, with Nathan Summers techno-organically attached to him. Part 4. Endgame's conclusion. In Apocalypse's base in the Inhuman Great Refuge on the Moon, X-Factor defeats the Riders of the Storm, only to be defeated themselves by Medusa and Crystal, who are under Apocalypse's control. This allows Apocalypse to imprison them and try to leech off their life energies to strengthen his own. But then the entire group is freed by Black Bolt, Karnak, and Gorgon. Jean Grey and the Beast, they go to help Nathan while the others blast Apocalypse. Askani arrives and looks on, and she sees Hank and Jean about to touch Nathan's crochet and prevents them from doing so because they would be electrocuted on it. And with Askani being pure energy, she can take the heat. After freeing Nathan, they realize that he's been infected with the same virus that SHIP was, and he's now likely to die. So Nathan, he uses his telepathy to yank Jean into his mind for help in psionically combating the virus, which is personified in his mind as an amalgam of both himself and Apocalypse. While battling this amalgam, Jean Grey plays possum long enough to pull Scott's astral form in to help her. With Jean and Nathan turbocharging his own power, Cyclops leaps up in the physical world and unleashes a powerful optic blast unlike any he's ever done, one that seemingly destroys Apocalypse. But even with Apocalypse defeated, Nathan is still dying, and he's placed inside SHIP's survival module, where SHIP intermerges with the boy in order to stave off the virus's effects. Askani claims to be able to take him away to the future to save his life, and Scott reluctantly lets his son go. The Inhumans celebrate their victory and reclaim their home, while the Watcher, Uatu that is, who lives on the moon and observed the events, he applauds Cyclops for his choice. Alright, here are my thoughts on Endgame. This storyline was plotted by Jim Lee and Whilce Portacio, with the latter being the artist and Chris Claremont doing the script. It was well known and heavily alluded to at the time that the members of X-Factor were going to be rejoining the X-Men, and this storyline was a way of removing the largest obstacles to that transition, namely X-Factor's sentient headquarters and Cyclops' son. It's also worth noting that each member was dating somebody at the time. Scott and Jean were dating again, Hank and Trish Tilby were an item, Warren and Charlotte Jones were together, and Iceman was with Opal Tanaka. Also, with this being the 90s, the Marvel of the 90s that is, the company was placing a greater emphasis, a greater focus on artists, such as Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, and Whilce Portacio to name a few, going so far as to give them greater creative control over titles in order to keep them around. Yet they had greater control over things, including plot elements, leaving writers like Chris Claremont as nothing more than dialogue providers. And this is what made Chris Claremont leave Marvel right after X-Men number 3. However, he made the most of his relegated role in Endgame, especially with the conclusion. For the final chapter, he used it to reclaim Cyclops, who had been bastardized as a character since the very start of X Factor's run, as a selfish guy who ran out on his wife and kid to be with his old girlfriend, an old girlfriend who even scolded him for his decision to do so. With Endgame's final part, Claremont narrated the whole story from Cyclops' perspective, showing his inner thoughts of himself as a man, a mutant, a superhero, and a father, all insights into his character to let the readers better understand the decision he made to send his son into the future, not knowing if he'd ever see him again. And though it pained him, he made the hard but selfless choice. And Cyclops, he makes those choices frequently, which is why he is a GOAT among X-Men leaders. And Claremont also used that chapter as a meta-commentary on the nature of superheroes and supervillains, and how every hero needs a villain, and how both always seem to come back from the dead. Apocalypse, what he was to this iteration of X Factor, is what Magneto always was to the X-Men. Also, as we later learn, the X-Men's ally, Cable, who first appeared over a year before the storyline, is revealed to be the adult Nathan Summers returned from the future. And despite his gruff exterior, he's gotten to know and accept his family and the craziness that comes with being part of the Summers family tree. Additionally, Ship went with Nathan into the future, and his consciousness went dormant upon arrival. But over a decade after their arrival, the teenage Nathan met a fellow mutant telepath by the name of Blacksmith, who helped train him and awaken Ship's consciousness, which now adopted the name Professor. The Professor was directly interfaced with Nathan's techno-organic parts, integrating himself into his mind and body, and he was able to monitor Nathan's biosigns, access his powers, regulate the techno-organic virus for him, among other things. It was linked to various sensor systems and could access any other technology that Nathan, as Cable, had later incorporated into his techno-organics, including the body-sliding teleportation equipment. The Professor was later transferred into the databanks of Greymalkin, a massive space station that Cable had brought back in time with him, and was later co-opted by Magneto into Avalon during the Fatal Attraction storyline, during which Cable rescued the Professor's programming and brought it back to Earth and installed it in X-Force's Camp Verde computer systems at their desert headquarters. And during the Phalanx Covenant, a member of the techno-organic group, the Phalanx, tried to override the Camp Verde computer system, but its programming was overwhelmed by the Professor, which assimilated and bonded with the Phalanx drone, thus receiving the same capabilities of that species as well. Now possessing an individual techno-organic body, it changed its name to Prosh, a portmanteau of Professor and Ship, but left Earth after his energy signature became a threat to Cable. Also, the Riders of the Storm, they were explicitly stated to be Inhumans during their first appearances here. However, when they and Apocalypse resurfaced over a year later during the Executioner's Song crossover, they were explicitly referred to as mutants and have been treated as such ever since. Okay, there are still some burning questions I have about this storyline even 30 years later. For example, the techno-organic virus. Did they know it was going to be that back then? Because they were calling it a cancer during this storyline, but Nathan's body, it looks like it's turning into a cyborg with all these lines of circuitry. And also, many elements of this storyline beg the question of if Chris Claremont intended Nathan and Cable to be the same person. Because a year prior to this storyline, in the Days of Future Present storyline in Uncanny X-Men Annual number 14, we see Cable and Nathan Summers in the same panel. But in Endgame, it's hinted that they're the same person with multiple images of Cable in the final chapter, especially in particular in the final panel in the final page. Hell, even in the letters section several issues later for X Factor, one fan picked up on this as well. Also, Apocalypse makes reference to the 12 here, but that turned out to be a very disappointing and pointless storyline almost a decade later. And the Apocalypse Manifesto is appended to the first 2 issues of this 4-parter, giving an analysis of each member of X Factor, with Cyclops listed as a progenitor of the 12. Also, does Apocalypse have telepathy, or was he just linked with the techno virus that he infected Nathan with? because his appearance in Nathan's mind during the astral plane battle, that still baffles me. And Askani, what was the intent with her had Claremont had stayed on the X titles? I mean, here in her introduction, she was sent back in time to prevent Nathan's infection, but something goes wrong during her transition. When she arrives, it made her into a solid energy being, not a purely physical being. And then she brings Nathan and Ship by extension into the future, and when she arrives there, she discorporates. A few years later, another Askani is sent back to the present during the Fathers and Sons storyline in Cable's solo series, and it's like they're off the assembly line or something. And no, when it comes to Askani, I will not discuss the role of Rachel Summers there. It becomes too much of a tangent. Another question I have is Charlotte Jones. How is she able to enter Ship when its programming allowed only mutants to enter it? I mean, that made me think at first that she might be a latent mutant, but the more I thought about it though, she never became a latent mutant, and we can chalk it up to Ship malfunctioning because of that virus that it had. And though Ship is a he, it took on a female voice during both of its appearances as Ship and the Professor, Cable's computer, in the 90s X-Men cartoon, like so.
Ship! Are you all right?
It was the best I could manage, Beast. He will not be gone forever.
Illogical. The needs of the many prevail over the needs of the few. Destroy Bishop, and your mission is accomplished.
And Jean Grey's encounter with Synapse reawakened her telepathy, which had been dormant since her return from suspended animation in Fantastic Four issue number 286. And yes, Endgame was the final X-Factor story before the Muir Island crossover, where at the end of which, they were reabsorbed into the X-Men. And also, Endgame, in retrospect, this is Cable's origin story, or at least the start of it. Okay, Shaghousers, that's what I got for you for this episode. Tune in next week. I'm going to be doing something on Marvel's Black characters. Y'all have a good one, folks. Later.
Mansion, apartment.
Shack, house. Yes!